Hey everyone, I'm back again to read a second excerpt from When Love Takes Over. See, pretty. Um, the excerpt that I'm going to be sharing now is we're still in the leather shop, but instead of looking at the scene from Van's perspective, we are now switching to Zach's perspective. And just a little side note for those of you interested, this scene that I'm going to read is based on a real life experience. Okay, so here we go. Should he continue to fake interest in the leather harness, or dash out of what was obviously not the sort of leather store he commonly frequented? Judging from the amused expressions of the two men on the opposite side of the store, Zach was leaning more toward a speedy exit. But he couldn't move as he silently berated himself for not realizing what type of store this was. It wasn't as though he'd never been inside a leather shop before. Ben had taken him to one in Houston a couple of years ago, and it made him uncomfortable. The raw sexual depravity on display had called to the part of him he'd spent years getting under control, and the fact that Ben had been trying to school him on the uses of harnesses and masks only hastened the awakening. He exited the store and promised never to return for fear of releasing a part of himself that needed to remain checked. Ben hadn't understood. In fact, they'd argued about Zach's continual need to remain in control of aspects of his life that Ben saw no need to rein in. But there was no way Zach could make Ben understand. Within him existed something so primal it defied comprehension. And Zach repressed anything he couldn't figure out, a trick he picked up from his father. And as Zach stood there, battling the rising swell of lust created by the smell of leather, he spotted a man so beautiful that the sight of him almost made Zach cast all his previous inhibitions aside and rush toward him like a wave crashing upon the shore. It wasn't the guy who obviously worked here with a diamond stud in his nose. It was the guy next to him, the one with the short brown hair that also cut a manly swath down from his sideburns, across the rugged cut of his jaw, and around a pair of perfectly symmetrical lips. He also had a perfect pair of steely eyes. He looked intimidating, but gentle at the same time, especially in the way the strong angle of his nose was softened by the plush indentation of flesh at the cleft of his chin. Well-muscled arms extended out of a brown tank top. On the shirt was a picture of a cupcake with the words "Eat Me" written across the top. Zach wanted to do just that. He'd never seen someone so beautiful. Whenever he ran across some perfect model type, their flawlessness would usually piss him off, especially since Zach only ever saw flaws in himself. But this guy didn't stir up his usual feelings of self-loathing. This one made the snake in his shorts uncoil as he fantasized about licking the icing off the man's cupcake. The response worried Zach. Just a few hours ago, all he could think about was Ben. Now, as he stared into the silvery blue eyes that peeked at him from around the corner, he had difficulty recalling what Ben even looked like. Shouldn't he be feeling more gun-shy right about now, instead of wanting to crawl on top of some random stranger? Still, the only thought that sped through his mind as quickly as his cock stiffened was to take the man in his arms and caress his sun-kissed skin. But there was no way a guy like that would be interested in Zach, who'd had his flaws cataloged by others for most of his life. Not only was he a bumbling, insecure fool, but Zach's glaringly white skin and red hair made him unpopular in a gay world where tanned bodies were all the rage. All the sun did for him was scorch his flesh a cherry red. Besides, from the look of his 6-foot, well-toned frame, the guy was most likely a top, and probably enjoyed wrecking someone else's ass more than having his own ass plundered. Zach had bottomed before on special occasions like birthdays and anniversaries, but he didn't enjoy it. He preferred to fuck rather than be fucked. There existed within him a need to dominate. He doubted Mr. Tanbody offered his ass up to anyone. "Looking for anything special?" the guy with the diamond stud asked. An impish grin played across his face. It told Zach that he was obviously the butt of a joke between the two. "Just browsing." The employee's polite smile immediately told Zach that his lie hadn't worked. He didn't care. He planned on doing one lap around the store, perhaps study an article of clothing or two, if rubber suits and assless pants counted as clothing, and then depart as quickly as he dashed inside. "Just let me know if you need anything," the guy said before disappearing back into the dressing room he previously stepped out of. Zach realized he'd been left alone in the store with Mr. Tanned Body, who still stood silently staring at him. The realization urged his feet to move toward the back part of the store. As he worked his way around the gas masks, he tried to forget about the fact that he was being watched. Maybe the guy worked security and had somehow pegged Zack as a potential shoplifter. There couldn't be any other reason that Zack could fathom, so he gave the guy his back and inspected the leather harnesses along the far left wall. They were obviously different styles, but he had no clue what the smaller ones that looked like holsters were called. He entertained the idea of trying one on just for show, but that would mean taking off his shirt. He definitely didn't want to do that. People typically poked fun at how white he was. Instead, he worked his way past the harnesses and approached the back wall, where the dressing room was located. There he found a cardboard display spotlighting a tub jam-packed with lube of assorted varieties he'd never even heard of. Boy butter, elbow grease, spunk, and fist powder. The last brand name made him shudder. The thought of someone shoving an entire fist up his ass caused Zack's hold to clench tightly shut. No matter how much being here excited him sexually, fisting had never turned him on. And the unpleasant image of some guy elbow deep up another man's ass calmed the raging waters that had churned so vigorously inside. In fact, he was certain his asshole wouldn't relax until he left this place that sold objects whose sole purpose seemed to be destroying the elasticity of a part of the body he preferred to remain tight. He made his way around the tub of lube and stood studying the latex wrestling suits and leather aprons that covered the far wall. He could understand the fascination with the wrestling singlets. Muscled guys rolling around in skimpy gear turned him on too. However, why would anyone purchase a leather apron? It resembled something a sadistic butcher might wear in a horror movie. As he pondered what the aprons were used for sexually, the door to the dressing room fell open, and Zack gasped. The store employee struggled to help a rather obese man shove himself inside a full-body rubber suit. Talcum powder spotted the interior of the room and the outside of the outfit. It had also gotten on their faces. There was so much powder everywhere that Zack figured this must be what a coke den looked like, at least one that had imploded. Turning around seemed the politest response, but the spectacle proved too much of a train wreck. The large man, who resembled Jabba the Hutt trying to squeeze into a hefty bag, cursed as he attempted to force every roll of fat inside. His constant struggle caused sweat to drench his body, turning the powder that caked his pregnant, hairy belly into paste. The poor employee, who knelt before the sweating crotch from which hung a tiny Vienna sausage, attempted to hike the suit further up the man's meaty thighs. When that failed, he stood and yanked with all his might as the rotund fellow lifted his leg in a vain attempt at assistance. The slick material, made even slicker by the man's perspiration, caused the employee to lose his grip. The rubber snapped back quite unexpectedly for the big guy who already teetered precariously on one bulky limb. Unbalanced, he toppled backward onto the dressing room floor, causing the layer of powder to explode upward and resulting in a momentary whiteout in the small room. Before he could help himself, Zack broke out into laughter. The customer didn't appreciate Zack's sense of humor and called him a fuckwad. "I'm sorry," he said as he backed up. Zack needed to get out of there before he embarrassed himself further, so he turned around and bolted forward, completely forgetting about the display behind him. He struck the lube bin, which began a rather horrifying chain of events. The display fell over, causing bottles of lube to roll throughout the store, some of which he squashed open with his large, blundering feet. When Zack backed up in surprise, he collided with the wall, which contained the aprons and wrestling suits. The force of the impact caused the top row of hanging garments to fall from their perch and rain upon his head. "Need some help?" Zack looked up from amongst the aprons and crushed bottles of lube to find Mr. Tanned Body standing before him with a humorous twinkle in his rolling eyes. The rolling passion within Zack rolled forward once again. Alright, so there you go. Zack and Van have now seen each other. Alright, I'll see y'all back in the comments. Bye.